Now this is a subject I'm going to do today. The camera throws it a little bit into the distance. And I've decided to do a portrait format, slightly unusual in a typical landscape setting, but I want to do something slightly different. I quickly sketch it out and I use a 3 or 4B pencil. I'm afraid it's a bit bright, so you may not see much of the drawing to begin with. I think it's useful to establish the vanishing point, and always draw from the point rather than towards the point. Otherwise, in a funny way, you'll actually miss the point. I just sketch in enough lines to guide the brush. All my brushes, incidentally, are natural hair, round shaped brushes. Now I've decided to do the sky first. So cerulean blue, it's a nondescript warm grey. Cerulean blue with a bit of alizarin crimson and a tiny bit of raw sienna, just to sort of soften it a little bit. Start at the top and I brush it in as quickly as I can, but making sure I cover the whole of the paper now. I don't want to leave gaps and have to go back. That's always dangerous, going back into a wet or damp area with a loaded brush. That spells disaster in terms of cauliflowers and bleed backs and watermarks. So I keep going, covering the paper as quickly as I can. It's quite a warm day, a little bit of wind, but not that much. But the drying conditions are going to be pretty swift. So I need to keep going and keep that bead at the bottom of the wash, which gives me a little bit, keep that sort of nice and drippy, so I have a little bit more time. Now there's a few sort of horizontal stripes of stripes of bluey cloud here, so I use cobalt blue for that, making sure that I must make sure I've got less water on the brush now than is already on the paper, so that will merge with the damp grey wash but won't misbehave by forming cauliflowers. A little bit more water and a little bit warmer as we come down. I go paint round the buildings. My approach is to paint each area once, irrespective whether it's dark or light, big or small, in the distance or in the foreground. That will enable a fresher look, particularly in the sky. Grey is slightly lighter as I come down. Now I think I'll just go back and at the top of that sky with another little blue. So I'll just give my brush a shake with a bit of cobalt, again stiffer mixture, and use the moisture on the paper, and that horizontal feature in the sky will give the painting a sort of calm, peaceful look. Now rather than keep looking at the sky and worrying about it, I get straight on. Well, I'm now going to get straight on with the road. Bit of raw umber and cobalt violet. Start at the top again, just as at the sky, and gradually work down. This way, a little bit more deliberate, a sort of horizontal strokes as the road is horizontal. A bit more raw umber and a little bit more cobalt violet. Every time I go back to the palette, I'll often just dip into something a little bit different or a bit more of the same, just to add a bit of variety, and variety adds richness. Cover the whole of the paper with paint, I want this path to look solid, and this is an underlying wash. I shall go back and add texture to this, so that in contrast to the airiness and atmosphere of the sky, the road is going to look rough and solid. A little bit of cadmium yellow just to just to add the variety of it. I keep going. Tiny bit of burnt umber now, and a bit of cadmium lemon, a bit of cadmium orange as well. Try and maintain roughly the same tone, but changes the colour. And that's really covered 80% of the paper. A bit of cobalt and cadmium red, some ultramarine now, and cadmium red. That'll give me an interesting grey. Although these sheds are all black, I need to introduce a little bit of colour, concentrate on the tone, a little bit of raw sienna with that. And now this grey is for this, what you would describe as a white boat, but of course it's grey in the light. I'm just going to save a slight area of there's an upright post there that's supporting the balcony of the boat, of one of the sheds. A little muck, which may appear to be detail, but I think it adds interest and richness to the top of the gunnel of that boat. Bit more ultramarine and burnt sienna. Ultramarine, burnt sienna. Take the paint from the palette and then add water to the paint. Don't put a puddle in your palette and then add paint to the puddle. So the window, dark porthole window in the cabin of that boat. Cerulean, and there's a tarpaulin or blue boat. Don't try and name everything, it's just a little shape, which brings out the top of this near bluey white grey boat. Straight on to the anti-fouling underneath. This is going to be darker simply because it turns under the boat, and although there's no sharp shadows today, areas which don't face the sky will not be getting the diffuse light from the sky, and therefore always be a bit darker. I've saved that little bit of white for the upright of the porch of one of the sheds. Try and paint each area once the way I want it to look, to maintain the fresh transparency. A little bit of green with viridian and cadmium yellow. The foliage merges with the boat, so I don't want a hard edge there, so take advantage of the watercolour to do the work for you. And there's one of these large sort of polystyrene floats here, which are quite a yellowy shape. Again, they merge with the underneath of the boat, so let them just join together. Some light red, cerulean, not cerulean, sorry, alizarin, to get the red anti-fouling of the boat behind this first one. Again, the tone's very similar, so although the colour is different, they can merge and shake hands with one another, so there's not an edge that sticks out. ultramarine. There's some, I think they're trolleys and other boat paraphernalia here, but I think of them as little shapes. It's all sort of nautical paraphernalia. I think this is ultramarine and burnt sienna to give me the grey of this roof. Again, remember, although these are black sheds, in fact they call this area Black Shore, the roofs of the sheds, although you describe them as black, they face the sky, so they do get the light. So invariably the roofs of these sheds are actually lighter than the walls. Paint with deliberate positive strokes, so that you're not painting backwards and forwards like a painter and decorator. Raw umber and raw sienna. There's a bit of varnished wood at the top of this boat on the left. Just a roof of that other one. Don't want to overdo this one. It's right on the obviously the left hand border of the painting, so it isn't visually significant other than to try and confine the viewer's attention to the distance. And the roof of the harbour master's office, cobalt and light red, is as much about drawing or painting and forcing out the bow of the boat on the left as it is about the shed. Now this nondescript grey, again, a bit of cobalt and light red with a bit of raw sienna. Give me a warmish grey for the sort of steps, platform forming the steps into the shed. Everything's pretty dry now, so cobalt, raw sienna. Will be a good mixture for the far distance. Just a bluey green, and I've done that, just saved the white highlights that you can see in the distance. I want to paint the distance so the viewer peers into the picture in the same way as they peer into the distance. That will help mimic the feeling they get when they're actually at the on Black Shore. I'm hoping to replicate that in my painting. A bit of cadmium red, where there's the odd bit of red that I can, might be a buoy or a sign, doesn't really matter. Think of it as just a shape that will catch the viewer's eye. And there's a gantry here. Quite an important little shape, this, and if it's done in front of the background, it pushes the background even further into the picture, so that you have that layered of one thing in front of another. It's that gives you distance, besides the obvious perspective and making things in the distance less distinct and obviously smaller. Very difficult to see the actual detail of what things are in the distance. Obviously I know there are cars and boats and people and other bits and pieces, trailers, boat trailers, and traffic signs and cones, but I just treat them as a little spot of colour. So I just suggest them, and I'm hoping there'll be enough form in the foreground and middle distance boats for the viewer to make up their own minds about what it is. So that will just enough to satisfy the viewer that they can make out what it is without arousing their curiosity. And of course, they won't see clearly in the distance when they walk along here, so they mustn't see clearly in the distance when they look at the picture. Ultramarine, bit of burnt sienna. That will give me a warm grey for the side of the Harbour Master's office. Again, notice the side of the dark building is darker than the roof. And that little black again continues to draw the shape and emphasise the curved bow of the left-hand launch that's on the foreshore there. A lot of bits and pieces there, just little marks, enough to anchor the shed to the ground. Keep looking, but don't describe. I think that's the most important thing. Cobalt. And there's a large blue deep tarpaulin over this boat here. Notice how that brings out the bow of the boat in front of it. Fill the whole of paint the whole shape. Don't leave any holes in it. You don't want holes in the side of boats. There's a mistaken belief in leaving bits of white paper everywhere makes the painting look fresh. Well, I think leaving white paper has got to mean something. That was just a bit of raw sienna, by the way, for the mast, projecting out from underneath that blue tarpaulin. Slightly darker side with the raw umber to that float support that the boats are resting on. Cobalt violet, a little bit of viridian, almost straight out of the tube, just a little dab. Not to represent foliage, but to represent something indistinct in the distance. Some Windsor blue and alizarin crimson. And now some viridian. Viridian and alizarin crimson is a more interesting way, an alternative way of getting a rich dark, rather than just falling back on ultramarine and burnt umber. Quite a busy day today, a lot of visitors. Now this roof on the right is now ready, so raw umber, ultramarine, bit of burnt sienna. Rather than burnt umber, burnt sienna is warmer and it will give me a warmer grey. Some more ultramarine. So we'll start with the background one. I paint the area, the outside edge, the drawing part first, and then I can quickly fill in the rest with as fewer brush strokes as I can, and that stops me sort of mucking about. Hold the brush as far away from the ferrule as you dare. It may feel a bit awkward to start with, but you'll make a nice painterly mark, and will introduce your own sort of painting handwriting. You'll be able to hopefully communicate the intention behind the mark, because you'll leave evidence of the intention. I'm going to add a bit of blue now, just to make that introduce a bit of variety. It's dark, so as long as I've got the tone dark enough, then I can alter the colour. Again, make sure these sheds are solid, so make sure you've covered it with paint. This is a piece of Arche 140 £, rough surface paper, unstretched, simply on my sandwiched between my mount and drawing board, and you've got to work quite hard to, you've got to make the marks quite deliberate. Press the brush into the paper, which in itself steadies the hand, because you're pressing the brush onto the paper, so you won't wobble as much as you think you will. It's only when you tense up and are frightened of touching the paper that you start to get the shakes. Pressing the brush down and you will get a nice sharp edge. Again, notice I'm starting at the top. I started at the top and I'm working down, changing the colour a little bit. And paint around. So I'm trying to keep to this little guide I use of paint each area once, the way I want the painting to look at the end, much as a child might paint, really. Keep going when you do those sort of single strokes. Don't lose your nerve and then start to stroke it backwards and forwards. It's a bit of black here. I don't often use black, but if I want a little bit of a darker line, it's a useful colour to use. There was a time when I wouldn't have used black. Now, watch the perspective. Now these are all going down towards the vanishing point. Make a huge contribution, actually, those sort of marks, in an understated way. The layman viewer won't appreciate them and wouldn't be able to tell you what was wrong, but they would know it looked wrong. Always a little bit dark underneath the gable ends, simply because they don't face the light. Just slightly darker there, and I'll just suggest the door. I don't want it to look as if it's sort of cut out and stuck on. I want it to, so just watch that you don't come out of the tonal air in the tonal range of that particular shape, you know, the side. But again, notice I'm going to put in these shiplap, so it's just rehearsing that stroke to get the shiplap all going towards the vanishing point, which is near the central figure, still in a white shirt. Okay. It's quite an awkward composition, this, so I'm hoping the figure will do quite a lot. It's got a lot of work to do to stop the figure drifting out towards the left. But you'll notice I've introduced a little bit of red to the left of the figure, which will stop the viewer going too far out of the painting. More greys from a variety of essentially blues and orangey reds. Viridian, raw sienna, makes a nice soft organic green for these weeds and grass which are growing sort of gradually encroaching over the on the edge of the road where there's less traffic to disturb it. Try and avoid painting too many blades of grass. Screw your eyes up and look at it in terms of masses. Bit of cadmium yellow just to introduce a bit of variety of the green. Cadmiums are quite opaque, so they're quite useful to go over painting. Almost like a sort of gouache. So work our way down towards this bottom right hand corner. Again, I keep changing the green, add a little bit more yellow or raw sienna or cadmium yellow or cadmium lemon or cadmium orange to the viridian, just to introduce a variety. And with a brush of water, or a damp brush should say, that will soften the edge and connect the grass to the gravelly road. After all, that edge is nowhere near as hard as, say, the edge of any of the roofs against the sky, and therefore we must be careful to minimise the edge by softening it with water, essentially dampening it next to it so that the wash can disperse out. This is a bit of cerulean blue. There's some sort of trolley or trailer thing here. Cerulean is quite a heavy, opaque blue, so it's good for overpainting, and there's a little part of it going up, and that's nice to break the horizontal of the anti-fouling on that boat, and again adds layer in the sense of it's in front of the boat. So I've got the trailer in front of the white boat, in front of the blue boat, in front of the distance. There's one or two little white bits which I've got left, and that I want that to, particularly in the shade underneath things, I don't want that to have any sparkle, because it negates the feeling that it's sort of in the shadows and underneath things. Keep the sparkle, if you want it, to the areas that are catching the light. Just darken that a bit, but just be careful that you don't go around overpainting everything twice. There's a green skip there which I've missed out. I wasn't keen on that. It looked out of place. That's the nice, I'm making a painting with paper, paint and the subject, and I feel free to add or miss out anything I like, on the grounds that it will improve my painting and for no other reason. Just a slight warm wash here. I made this with raw sienna and alizarin crimson. It's just to get that pinky warmth there. And that takes off the glaring whiteness And if I leave that man with a white shirt, then that will help. Bit of gubbins on the waterline of this boat on the right, so I'll put it in. There's nothing wrong with adding that sort of detail, as long as you do it in a sort of positive way. Detail isn't the opposite of looseness. It's painting detail so it looks as if it's been painted loosely. That's the trick. And so often people simplify things by eliminating everything, and the world looks sort of smoothed out. I want it to look sort of untidy and full of the random effects of man and nature. And adding, in a sense, decay and rust and watermarks and aging will help that. Little dark accents, really just to sort of emphasize the edge of the neighbouring washers and passengers. There's a bit of a mast here, we'll just put that in. Bit of burnt umber and burnt sienna with that. There's a tall post here with a sort of gantry thing sticking out. Makes a nice shape, and try and keep them straight. You know, I think if masts and rigging, if they're straight, you should paint them straight. If you don't, and try and fake looseness, it will look careless and slapdash. But do it once. Try and get it right. It's the once bit that is the hard bit. Otherwise, what so many people do is they keep going back and tidying the picture up, and that knocks all of the life out of the painting stroke. This is ultramarine, bit of, for this chap, let's give him some trousers, blue jeans. Now a bit of cerulean blue on the left, on his left leg. Now the waist is a bit hard, it's sort of horizontal, cuts him in two. So if I wet my brush and just dampen the area up in his shirt, that will soften that side so the trousers look as if they belong to the shirt. A few dark accents round near his shoulders to pull him out. But I'll leave him with a white shirt, a little bit of unpainted paper, always sing songs for you. Cadmium yellow and cadmium orange. These little cones, which years ago I might not have put in, are opportunities to introduce a little bit of bright yellow. Just suggest them, don't go overboard with them. They need to stand out in the picture so that the viewer takes as much notice of them as they would if they were walking along. In other words, very little notice. But they're an opportunity to introduce colour almost straight out of the tube. Just going to darken that where it's quite dark, with a bit of ultramarine where it's the relief against the sky. cerulean, tiny bit of moisture caught in the palette. Let's set about some of these masts. As I say, keep them upright and keep them straight. If you paint them in too carelessly and too fast, they'll attract the viewer's attention simply because they won't look like masts. Tiny bit of sort of bluey grey. There's a sail furled round the foresail, going up from a boat behind here and then straight up to the top of the mast. That cross trees, I think they're called, that will appear a little bit dark against the sky because you're looking up at it. Suggest the rigging. Don't make the rigging too dark. That's a mistake a lot of people make. Now there's more masts and things down here. And lots in the distance. It's a dinghy park there where the dinghies are leaning against the sea wall, so some of the masts are not horizontal. Just a bit dark, so I just pat those just to take some of the visual impact away. Just bring out the straight edge on the top of the gunnel of that boat. Cobalt violet, bit of viridian, just give that figure skirt or trousers and indicate the legs. Cadmium red and light red. I want to just give that little bit, that anti-fouling a little bit more of a zing, so it's brighter than the red of the anti-fouling on the boat on the left. I'm a great believer in cleaning my palette, so otherwise if you get lazy you keep going back to the same mixtures. So clean the palette up. And if I'm interested in doing a little bit of dry brush, I'll often just take a tissue, bit of kitchen roll, which I can draw my brush across. Raw sienna, raw umber, cobalt violet, and I want to add some texture to this roadway now. So it looks more solid than the sky. If you do this sort of thing and you're overpainting for a purpose, you're not overpainting simply because you're unhappy with the colour, you're overpainting to introduce texture and a contrast between the nature of the surface of the roadway with the airiness of the sky. A little bit more raw umber. As I say, with the overpainting, make sure that you leave some of that first wash showing through, otherwise there'll be no point in doing it. A damp brush will soften some of it, so it will sort of join forces. And in a peculiar way, you want it to look so that the viewer wonders how it was done, because there'll be some hard marks and there'll be some soft marks, or sort of washes where it appears to have joined onto the underwash, but there'll also be some marks with a harder edge to them. Tiny bit more raw umber with a dry brush. Now I can a bit more dry brush in the foreground where the rough texture of the flints and pebbles and stones is more evident. So even on a roadway like this, you paint it in a different way in the foreground to the way you would paint it in the middle distance or in the far distance. Bit of dry brush. Which you can get by pulling the brush across the paper, so that the rough ridges of the paper pull the paint off the brush and the wash isn't fluid enough to flow into the valleys of the paper. Now there's more grass or patches of stubborn weed and foliage just trying to make its way through the pebbles in this corner. It nicely sort of cuts off rounds off the bottom right hand corner, and you get a nice sort of curve. The danger is that instead of leading the viewer into the picture, it leads the viewer down into the corner, so I'll need to soften it a bit so they're less aware and they go up into the centre of the painting. Now a slightly smaller brush. With paint almost the consistency of toothpaste, straight out of the tube. I can feel it's quite sticky, and then I can indicate some tracks in that road, but also pick out the ones which, well, that might be a bit heavier, let's see, do the ones which actually add to the composition and help lead the viewer into the painting. A few little flints and stones, again very much on the foreground, to pick the viewers, well, just to emphasise that this area is nearer to me than obviously further into the picture. So treat each area according to where it is in the picture plane with a bit of respect. Yes, I thought that might be a bit heavy, so I'm just going to go back with some clean water and soften that. While it's still damp and wet, it's surprising what you can do. A little bit of cadmium yellow and cadmium lemon, almost used like gouache. In a small area is fine. In fact, a little bit of opaque paint can set up the areas that are more transparent. It's all about contrast and variety. And variety adds richness to the painting. Just keep looking at the subject. any tiny little variations in the nature of the surface, the tone or the colour, just go for them, but try and keep to roughly the same tonal range, so nothing looks as if it sticks out. It wants to remain on the surface of the lane and be part of the lane. Now I'm a bit unhappy with this. I'm coming towards the end, so now I can make some decisions about areas which may need a bit of overpainting. That I felt that could be a little bit darker, and now fade it out with some clean water to get the sort of curve on the on that boat. Some additional masts. Darken that. I'm just darkening that corner, and again, these alterations are for tone rather than changes of colour. And if you're correcting things with them for what I call a good painterly reason, in other words, correcting or changing drawing or tone, or adding texture, or softening an edge or hardening an edge, sharpening up an edge, you can normally get away with it. Once you start tidying it up by painting everything twice because of the wrong colour, then it starts to look a bit muddy. So leave behind the painterly intention behind the mark. Now that's sort of drying, I'm just going to get a knife out, sharp sort of razor blade knife, just to scratch out one or two little highlights of light masts where they stick out. Very difficult to paint these. You could either use a bit of gouache, Chinese white, but these are only going to be small areas. I've just got to be careful I minimise this because it's a bit addictive doing this. That rope hanging down, I've just invented that, and that helps again put a rope in front of the blue boat. Same with that one. Do one thing that's a good idea and then you go and repeat it somewhere else. Just be careful of that. Something I've just done. So I've got dark against light. And that will give me the distance there. Where the ropes go against dark. I've nearly finished, and I think we've nearly got to the time where I think what I'll do is take this back to the studio and have a look to see, assess the painting away from the subject, and then I can see, and I've already spotted something which I must alter. I wonder if you've managed to see it as well, but I'll alter that when I get back to the studio. Right, we're back in the studio now, and it'll be interesting to have a look to see what we've brought home. Don't be quick to judge outdoor painting, particularly in situ. You need to get away from the hustle and bustle of the outside world and the sun and the wind and the traffic. And of course, having a bit of a break means that when you look at the painting, when you get it back home, you sort of take it by surprise. And frankly, sometimes when you've been concentrating, as you have to when you're painting outside, you look at the picture in the studio and you think, well, where's that come from? It's very unusual for me to sort of touch a painting once I have got it home, unless there really is some sort of glaring, not mistake, but something that mucks up the picture. And of course I'm away from the subject, so I'm a bit more emboldened to change things rather than be bullied by the facts, the literal facts in front of me. So let's just have a look to see what we've got here. Now, on the whole, I feel that this painting is fairly successful. I mean, there's always bits that will go wrong in paintings, particularly when they're painted outside. The only thing that caught my eye when I got it home, and usually I'm fairly sensitive to this sort of thing, was that this gantry in the distance was there, lined up exactly with this mast sticking out of this blue tarpaulin wrapped around this boat. And that would have confused the viewer. So I had to alter it, and I've decided to lower it. I did entertain the idea of raising it up. It's funny how there's always one area of a painting which causes more trouble than the rest of it put together. Anyway, I decided to reduce it, so it is no longer that accidental alignment. And that's the only thing I've changed. Don't start tidying it up because you feel the painting looks a little bit rough, because it's the roughness, the rawness, the authenticity of a painting done outside which attracts, I think, more the viewer and gives it life beyond the literal representation of what was there. And I'm quite pleased, dare I say it, with the texture of this, the road here. It looks solid, and that was the main object of doing this sort of this overpainting, to make it look different in terms of what it was, you know, the solid earth rather than the airy sky. So I'm going to leave it like that. I feel it's sort of captured the day. And if there's anything wrong with the painting, I say if, let's say the things that are wrong with the painting are really for me to know, in a sense. The main faults, if I can put it like that, are the shortcomings in the way I've executed my vision. And of course only I, as indeed you, when you do your paintings, only you will know the difference between how you wanted the picture to turn out and the actual execution of it. And there's always going to be a gap between the vision and the final painting, and you must just accept that and let others make judgments, because they won't be privy to that little insight that only you as the painter know. Well, I hope watching me, and in a sense coming with me to paint outside, has encouraged you to paint outside. Apart from being a pleasant occupation, you will learn a lot, and that knowledge, which comes from experience, will find its way into your studio watercolours, whether you like it or not. If you're not a frequent or a beginner, or even a beginner in terms of painting outside, I think it's a good idea to sort of just practice putting up your easel and setting yourself up in the garden, so that when you eventually go out in public, if I can put it like that, you look as if you know what you're doing. And the other thing I would suggest, if plein air painting is new to you, is have an idea of where you're going to go, so that you are already mentally prepared for the subject, and you are not going to tire yourself out wandering around looking for a good subject. Recognise a good subject, and this was a difficult composition in many ways, but try and paint something which isn't a sort of cliched landscape, so it stands out from the crowd. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you have got something out of the video. Happy painting.